My name is Charlotte Reed, and I live on land everyone once told me was worthless. Right now, I'm standing barefoot on the porch of my farmhouse, a mug of black coffee warming my hands. The fields stretch out before me, endless rows of green, kissed by the early morning sun. Tractors hum in the distance, workers load crates onto refrigerated trucks, and a gentle breeze carries the rich, earthy scent of soil mixed with dew. I used to hate the smell of dirt. It reminded me of failure, of all the voices telling me I'd never amount to anything, that farming was for men, or worse, that it was a dead dream in a modern world.
But now?
That same smell is the fragrance of my triumph. My phone buzzes on the porch rail. I glance at the screen, and a wry smile curls across my lips. It's a message from the city food board, asking for an urgent meeting. The irony isn't lost on me. The same city that laughed when I said I'd build a farm, now they depend on me to feed their families. I take a slow sip of coffee, letting the bitterness roll over my tongue. My nails are still dirty from last night's harvest. I notice them, and instead of shame, I feel pride. They mocked me once. Today, they're at my mercy. I wasn't always this woman who could look a city official in the eye without blinking. Back then, I was just Charlotte, the awkward girl who inherited nothing but a patch of dusty land and 1,000 doubts. I remember the day like it was carved into my bones. I was 22, standing in my uncle's kitchen after my father passed. The family gathered around the table, voices heavy with pity, but eyes sharp with judgment. "Sell the land, Charlotte," my uncle, Richard, had said, slapping the table as though his authority could shake me into obedience. "You'll never make it work. Farming isn't for you. It's backbreaking, dirty, and frankly, it's not a woman's place." My cheeks burned hot, and I dug my nails into my palms under the table to stop my hands from trembling. My cousin snickered from across the room, whispering something about me playing dress-up farmer. I swallowed hard, tasting bitterness and humiliation. But then, my grandmother, Eleanor, reached for me. Her hand was soft, wrinkled, and trembling, but her grip was fierce. She pressed something small into my palm, a tiny silver locket with a pressed flower inside. "Your father planted that flower," she whispered in my ear. "He always believed this land could bloom again. Don't let them steal that dream from you." Tears burned at the corners of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall in front of everyone. Instead, I tucked the locket against my chest, lifted my chin, and forced my voice not to crack. "I'm not selling," I said. The room went silent. Then came the laughter. Loud, cruel, suffocating. My uncle shook his head in disgust, my cousin rolled her eyes, and even my mother looked away, ashamed. That was the night I packed a bag, slipped the locket around my neck, and walked out onto the fields under a sky smeared with stars. The soil was cold beneath my feet, the air heavy with loneliness, but deep in my chest, a spark flickered. If they thought I couldn't do it, I'd prove them wrong, even if it meant breaking myself in the process. The first year nearly broke me. I still remember my hands blistering on the shovel, my back aching from bending over rows of soil that refused to yield. I didn't know the science behind crops or the rhythm of the seasons. More than once, I collapsed into the dirt, tears soaking into the ground as if my pain might water the barren earth. Money was scarce. I took shifts at a diner in town just to afford seeds. I'd serve coffee with a forced smile, ignoring the whispers from locals who said, "There goes the girl trying to be a farmer." Their laughter stung, but every dollar I tucked away was another step toward proving them wrong. Then one evening, after a particularly rough double shift, I met Mrs. Harper, a retired agricultural scientist who'd moved into town. She was in her late 60s, sharp as a blade, with silver hair tied back in a braid and a presence that made people sit straighter. She noticed the mud on my boots as I poured her coffee. "You're working the Reed land, aren't you?" she asked. I hesitated, embarrassed. "Trying to," I muttered. Her eyes softened, but her voice was firm. "That land has good bones. It needs patience, not pity. If you're serious, I can show you a few things." That night changed everything. Mrs. Harper became my quiet mentor. She taught me about soil rotation, organic composting, and water conservation. She introduced me to sustainable farming methods that didn't require big machines I couldn't afford. More than that, she taught me resilience. Farming isn't about control, she said once. It's about partnership. You respect the land, it'll respect you back. Slowly, painfully, things began to shift. My first crop of tomatoes wasn't perfect, but it was real. I sold them at the local farmer's market, my hands shaking as I arranged the crates. To my surprise, people bought them. One woman even came back the next week, asking for more. That first sale lit something inside me. Seasons passed. Each harvest was a little better than the last. I reinvested every penny, building small greenhouses, experimenting with new seeds, and partnering with local restaurants who craved fresh, organic produce. By my fourth year, I signed my first big contract with a small grocery chain in the city. My name wasn't in bold print, just a supplier number on an invoice, but it was enough. Enough to pay off debts, enough to buy new equipment, enough to believe I was finally building something that mattered. Still, I kept my success quiet. To the outside world, I was just Charlotte Reed, that stubborn girl clinging to her daddy's land. On social media, I posted only modest photos, sunsets over the fields, baskets of vegetables, nothing that hinted at the contracts, the growing team of workers, or the refrigerated trucks now bearing my farm's name. My family didn't ask, and I didn't tell. Their silence was easier than reopening old wounds. But inside, I knew the truth. The land they mocked was finally blooming. And with each sunrise over those green fields, I was blooming too. It was a Tuesday morning when they came back into my life. I had just finished walking through the greenhouse tunnels, the air heavy with the sweet tang of ripening strawberries, when my farm manager handed me a clipboard. "You've got visitors, Ms. Reed." City delegation. Visitors. The word tasted strange. When I stepped into the conference room we'd built inside the renovated barn, I nearly froze. Sitting at the long oak table weren't just city officials in press suits, but my Uncle Richard, his daughter, and two other relatives who once mocked me the loudest. My heart thudded hard against my ribs, but I forced my face into calm neutrality. They didn't recognize me at first. My tailored blazer, pearl earrings, and hair swept neatly into a bun weren't part of the dirt-covered Charlotte they remembered. My uncle's eyes flicked over the polished wooden walls, the framed certifications, and the large aerial photograph of the farm that hung proudly above me. The head of the city's food board cleared his throat. "Ms. Reed, we're here to discuss expanding contracts for local produce supply. Your farm has grown into one of the largest distributors in the county. Frankly, the city depends on you now." My uncle's jaw slackened. "Wait, your farm?" I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands in my lap. "Yes. Reed Acres. I own it. I built it." The silence was delicious. Their eyes darted around the room, the polished binders stacked neatly on the shelves, the fresh flowers arranged on the table, the digital charts on the screen showing crop yields. Every detail screamed success. Finally, my cousin spoke, her voice dripping disbelief. This can't be real. You were supposed to fail. Everyone said." I cut her off gently, my tone smooth but firm. "Everyone said I couldn't. And yet, here you are sitting in my office, asking for what only I can provide." Their faces flushed, shame and astonishment warring in their expressions. My uncle shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his hands tightening into fists. "Charlotte, you don't understand. The city's in crisis. Supply chains are fragile, and your farm feeds your city." I finished for him. I rose from my chair and walked slowly to the window. Outside, through the glass, they could see the workers loading trucks with crisp lettuce, bright peppers, and baskets of apples. Dozens of crates stacked high, ready to roll into the heart of the city. "Every bite that enters your restaurants, your schools, your homes," I said softly, "comes from the land you told me was worthless." The city official leaned forward, eager. "Ms. Reed, if you can increase output, we're prepared to renegotiate your contract at double the rate." I turned back, letting my gaze settle on my uncle. He wouldn't meet my eyes. My cousin fidgeted with her nails, her confidence unraveling. It wasn't just about contracts anymore. This was about dignity, about finally standing in the place I had once only dreamed of. Funny, I murmured. Years ago, you told me this farm was a waste of time, that I'd embarrass myself trying.
And now?
Now your city runs on my harvests. My words lingered in the room like thunder after lightning. For the first time in years, they had nothing to say. I let the silence stretch, heavy and uncomfortable, before I finally spoke again. If you want my farm's produce, you'll get it. But not on your terms. On mine. The city official nodded eagerly, already pulling out a pen, but I raised a hand. Not yet. This isn't just about numbers. This is about respect. I turned my eyes on my uncle. Richard, years ago you told me farming wasn't for women. You told me to sell my land. To give up. If you want this partnership to happen, I need one thing first: an apology. Right here. Right now. His face turned crimson. His jaw clenched, as if the words might choke him. For a long, stubborn moment, he stared at the floor. Then, with a bitter swallow, he muttered, I was wrong. I underestimated you. I arched a brow. That's not enough. His eyes flicked up to mine, and finally, with a voice barely above a whisper, he said, I'm sorry, Charlotte. The power in those words didn't erase the years of humiliation, but it felt like reclaiming something I had been denied. Next, I turned to my cousin. She shifted in her chair, arms folded. And you, I said evenly. You used to laugh at me. Call me a pretend farmer. If you want access to my produce, you're going to contribute something to this deal. Every month, you'll fund a scholarship for young women who want to enter agriculture. You'll help other girls chase the dream you mocked me for. Her lips parted in protest, but I didn't flinch. Slowly, reluctantly, she nodded. I moved my gaze to the officials. And as for the city, you'll not just take my crops, you'll support my vision. We're going to create programs to promote sustainable farming, to reduce waste, to feed children in schools who can't afford healthy meals. If I'm feeding your city, it will be done with dignity, not just profit. The head of the board scribbled notes furiously. Yes, Ms. Reed. We can draft those terms. I leaned back in my chair, my locket cool against my skin.
Good.
Because I don't just want to feed your city. I want to change it. My uncle's shoulders sagged, his pride finally breaking. My cousin stared down at her manicured nails, ashamed. And the city officials, who once might have dismissed a young woman in boots and dirt-stained jeans, now looked at me with something close to reverence. I wasn't bargaining anymore. I was leading. The weeks that followed felt like standing in sunlight after years of rain. True to their word, the city officials signed on to my conditions. The scholarship fund was announced, and I watched with quiet pride as the first applications rolled in. Young women who reminded me of myself, hungry for a chance, desperate to be taken seriously. My uncle visited the farm once after that meeting. He didn't say much, but I caught him standing by the greenhouse, staring at the rows of thriving plants with a look that was half disbelief, half regret. For the first time in my life, I saw humility in his eyes. My cousin took longer, but eventually she called. Her voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. Charlotte.
I'm sorry.
For everything. You were braver than any of us. I didn't say I forgave her right away. But a part of me knew this was a beginning. One evening, after a long day, I found myself back on the porch, just like that morning when the city called. The sky burned orange with sunset, the fields stretching out in waves of green and gold. I slipped my hand into my pocket and pulled out the tiny silver locket. I opened it, tracing the delicate pressed flower inside, the one my grandmother had given me, the one planted by my father's hand. I could almost hear her voice again. Don't let them steal the dream.
They tried.
God, how they tried. But I hadn't just kept the dream alive. I had expanded it, nurtured it, turned it into something far larger than myself. I closed the locket and let out a slow, steady breath. The girl who once shook with fear at a kitchen table was gone. In her place stood a woman who could hold her ground against anyone, who could feed an entire city and still carry her roots proudly. I smiled to myself. imagining the faces of those who once laughed whenever they sat down to dinner now, unknowingly consuming the fruits of my labor. They mocked my farm, I whispered into the twilight. Now I feed their city. And with that, I stepped back into the house, the sound of laughter from my workers drifting in from the fields, the land humming with life, my victory etched into every leaf and every seed.